to talk to you about the Long COVID DAO. So I want to start with what we believe, and this is a little bit of a sneak preview. This DAO has not officially launched yet, but looking forward to talking to all of you. The thing that we believe about long COVID is that it is primarily driven by viral persistence. What does that mean? That means virus that sticks around in your body and in your brain after the initial infection. And what does that mean? That means that we need antivirals to clear the remaining infection. And I want to convince you that this isn't necessarily a problem from 3 years ago, although a lot of us have moved on from the pandemic. This is a problem that's affecting people today. Long COVID is the fastest growing chronic health condition in human history. There are almost 100 million people right now, all around the world, who have long COVID, in some cases debilitating, but all kinds of ranges, from symptoms that have lasted for many, many months to people who can't get out of bed. This is costing the global economy almost $1 trillion, and that number is increasing every year because almost 1 in 20 COVID infections, even mild ones, result in long COVID. So this number is kind of going higher and higher all the time. And unfortunately, our governments have been very, very slow to adapt to this huge chronic health tsunami that we're in the middle of. The NIH in the United States, for example, has been famously slow in getting together treatments and clinical trials to actually cure people who need help. And so there are many, many folks who are getting desperate, and I was one of them. My story with long COVID started in March of 2020. I got infected initially very mildly. I was a healthy person, active person, and initially didn't have a lot of ill effects, but then slowly over the next 2.5 years, progressively worse. Symptoms, brain fog, difficulty concentrating, vascular symptoms, immune system dysregulation, a whole lot of stuff, and I was starting to lose hope. But then I found a paper that actually changed my life and led to an experiment. And that paper was an autopsy study. So a lot of the tests we have now for COVID, which is a very new disease, and the virus that causes it, SARS-CoV-2, well, there aren't good assays yet, right? So what you have to do is actually look at people's tissue to find out what's going on. What these researchers found was that many, many months after people's initial infection, if they died, sometimes from other causes, that virus was still in their body and brain. In some cases, for example, in their brain for so long that it had actually started to mutate into new viral variants. That could be happening to potentially any of us that have ever had a COVID infection, which is horrifying, but it's also very hopeful, because what does this mean, besides being kind of disturbing? Well, it means that if the virus is still in our body and our brains, maybe the reason we're seeing such large long COVID symptoms, why so many people are having these long after effects, is actually just because the virus is still in us. And that's good news because we can clear it with antivirals. And so that's what I did. I convinced some doctors to give me experimental treatments. I was lucky enough to be able to do that. And I took a cue from HIV research at the time, which is that typically you want to try combination therapeutics. You don't want a drug to develop for a virus or a pathogen to develop resistance to a drug. So you try combination therapeutics. The first one I tried in this combination of 3 treatments over 3 months was Paxlovid. Some of you may have heard of that. It's very commonly prescribed for COVID-19 right now. It's a viral replication inhibitor. And I combine that with a monoclonal antibody, a long-acting monoclonal antibody called Evusheld. And within 6 hours of the first treatment, my symptoms for the first time in years went away. And then in a couple days, they started to come back with maybe 50% strength. By the time I did my second treatment, my symptoms completely disappeared, and I've been totally symptom-free for 2 years now. And that's a really hopeful story. It was a hopeful story for myself, and it's potentially a hopeful story for a lot of other people. So I started telling it to some of the best COVID researchers and long COVID researchers in the world. Jake Lanville, who is a computational immunoengineer, was in the Netflix pandemic documentary. Annalise Barron, who is W1 Keck Professor of Bioengineering at Stanford. Dave Petrino, who is one of the foremost clinicians at Mount Sinai, treating long COVID patients, foremost in the world. And Ruth Ann Crystal, who's a doctor at Stanford, a leading long COVID advocate, and also has a daughter who has long COVID. And what we're working on together is ways to take my N of 1 and turn it into an N of 100 million. And we're doing this with what we're calling the Long COVID DAO. We're a new type of pharma, and we're driven by patients and driven by scientists. And so we'll be announcing more about this DAO in the near future, but basically we will have tokens which allow the community for the first time to actually have meaningful input in what could be one of the largest pharmaceutical interventions in human history, certainly in the last 100 years. And we think that this is an opportunity to actually do things differently. We don't have to repeat the mistakes that pharma companies have been making that we're all very familiar with now for many decades. We're doing this in 2 phases. Phase 1, because people need shots in arms, is to take the approach that I took, which is to use existing FDA-approved therapeutics, sometimes in combination, and deliver them to people now. That's fast. We don't need FDA approval. We can start going today. We're raising $1 million to do that. We're already about half of the way through and are starting to pick clinical trial sites, find our clinical research partners, and actually get started. Our second phase will take a lot longer. These are novel molecules that we're developing now, which are really cool, very interesting, and potentially very helpful, particularly in the ability to get into the brain, which is where a lot of the most concerning long-term symptoms are happening with COVID, whether that's long COVID or even mild COVID infections. And I don't have time to go into all of the details, but I'll just leave you with this one thought, which is even if you don't have long COVID, even if you don't know anybody who has long COVID, COVID infections aren't good. We have kind of normalized them because we had to get back to life and come to conferences like this, engage with our family and our friends and live. But we're taking an unacceptably high risk, actually, because what the research is showing us, these are many, many hundreds of studies now, is that even mild COVID infections can lead to actual brain damage, loss of IQ points between 3 and 9 points, every single infection, immune system damage, reproductive system damage, diabetes, strokes, heart attacks. This is not an innocuous virus, and if it's sticking around inside of us, we need to get rid of it. Part of the advantage of the approach that we're taking with the Long COVID DAO is that these drugs will not only treat long COVID, but they may also act as an ongoing passive antibody shield so that we can actually get back to living our lives without taking this kind of weird risk trade-off that we've accepted without fully understanding what the repercussions may be. We think that the drugs that we're developing now could actually help us to live healthier lives regardless of whether we have long COVID or not. So if you are interested in helping, if you know someone who has long COVID who might want to be a part of our clinical trials, if you just want to follow along, that's my Twitter, RD108. Please follow me, shoot me a message, or come talk to me after the conference. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh,
Any questions from the audience? Just give me a second until I give you the beautiful microphone.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm wondering, are there any clues yet as to maybe what kind of elevates somebody's risk profile for developing long COVID? Are there any kind of like immune system markers, or is there any evidence that kind of strengthening that aspect could get rid of that faster or prevent it?
It's a great question, and we don't know yet. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case that the severity of your initial infection, like if you get really, really sick, does that mean you're more likely to get long COVID? The answer is no. A lot of people who are getting long COVID just have an initially mild infection, and then the symptoms just kind of don't ever go away and sometimes start to get worse. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but right now we don't know.
So, so many people seem to be affected by long COVID, and a lot of them are not, let's say, engaged in the blockchain or crypto ecosystem. How are you thinking to bring more people on board and to be activated in something like a DAO?
That's a really good question. It's something that we're struggling with because I think particularly long COVID patients, some of them can't get out of bed, much less figure out how to use a wallet. And so I think it's a combination of things. One is, easier UX, UI that allows people to engage with this stuff. But maybe the bulk of what we'll be doing with most people is not actually distributing tokens and voting, but instead just disseminating research, doing things that are public facing and allow people to understand what the risks are and also what the potential solutions are. We have friends who are advocating for public funding for bills that are now in front of Congress in the United States and other places. So I think it's a multifaceted approach, but we can't do everything, unfortunately, and the size of the budgets that governments have will dwarf whatever we can do. What we can do is go fast and do a lot of massive parallel trials, and so that's where we're going to focus. Someone else had a question up here. Do they still have one? Or? Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.